Farage's £1 trillion black hole, the real cost of Reform UK's mass deportation plan. Going to read into this exclusive from Byline Times, you guys. So it says that reforms plans, which it claims would net huge savings over the coming decades, would actually cost the UK about 70 to 90 billion pounds on over the next 10 years alone. New analysis of official statistics and forecasters has suggested. And this is facts in our series of hashtag reform uncovered as well. So, of course, many people will dismiss this because this is from Byline Times, and those on the right will say, oh, it's propaganda from Byline, this is nonsense. But the reality is that whether you are a supporter of reform and supporter of Farage or not, the United Kingdom was built off the back of immigrants. The British Empire used immigrants to build the empire it had before it basically broke apart, and it's no longer what it is. But lots and lots of our foundations are built off immigrants, of people who were not born in the UK, and many of them have chosen to make the UK their home and have become embedded and part of the United Kingdom. And you should never forget that, regardless how you feel about stopping the boats and the migrants and whatnot. Never forget that there were migrants long before the whole boat crossings that came and have helped build the UK to what it is today. We should never forget that, and we should always be grateful to those who have contributed, who have worked to be a part of our society, to help build many foundations that we have today in the whole of the United Kingdom, not just in England, but Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, in all parts, in some way, shape, or form. And we should never, ever forget that. But the numbers have never really added up when it comes to this kind of thing. And the fact that Nigel Farage wants to do this mass deportation, and we're talking about people who are legally in the UK, people who are working, people who have contributed to society, people who are good, ordinary people. They could be your neighbours. They could be somebody that you know. They could be somebody that may not have been born a British citizen, but may have been born a British citizen, but have come here, and they are somebody that you consider a friend, part of your WhatsApp group, or somebody that you goes out for a drink with. That person may be of maybe another white person. You may not be by a certain skin colour or from a certain nationality. That person could find themselves being deported by the fact that they aren't British. This is something you should be very concerned about. There is a distinction that we need to understand, is that people are not taking on board, is that the numbers are very, very low of illegal migrants in comparison to legal migration here in the UK. But people don't want to read the numbers and the facts and statistics. They just want to hear the rhetoric, and they want easy solutions to their complex problems. And I can tell you categorically that no matter what Nigel Farage says to you, if he comes into power, he will not fix the NHS. He will not fix the cost of living crisis. He will not improve our lives. And yes, I totally understand the position that people have, is that the Conservatives left everything in a mess, and Labour are not doing nowhere near enough in government. 100% agreement with those assessments on them. You can't trust the Lib Dems because they got in bed with the Tories. The Green Party, in my opinion, are the best at the moment, but they are too small to see. They are too small right now to seize power, which is why some people aren't keen to put their vote around them, or people don't know enough about the party in comparison to Reform, because you hear about Nigel Farage all the time. I totally understand that, but I would really urge people to just listen to what he has said in the past and listen to what he has said now. I think that really, really does matter. And it's also important to stress that not every Reform supporter, not everybody who backs Nigel Farage is a racist and is a bigot. Some of them generally have concerns. Many of them just have no faith in a lot of politics and are willing to try something radical to see something that would change the UK that they hope would be for the better. Because there is one thing that we can all agree on. no matter what our political stance is that we all want people's lives to improve in some way, shape, or form. What we disagree on is how we want to get there. So, it sounds simple and almost seductive. Scrap illegal migration, close the hotels, deport those with no right to be here, then save the taxpayer 42 billion over the next decade and 243 billion over 80 years. That's the promise of Reform UK made its centrepiece of its immigration policy. 243 billion pounds, guys. That sounds really, really good. You know, it sounds like the kind of money that we had with Brexit before we had Brexit as well. Yeah. But the OBR has already shown that drastic cuts to migration will be net negative for the economy. We built on this analysis to show how Reform UK's own numbers reveal not hundreds of billions of savings, but a £1 trillion black hole. Oh, yes, the black hole. Yes, you hear a lot about the black hole from Rachel Reeves. This is actually a real one that's going to be created by Nigel Farage. So his previous pledge for a hard Brexit led to trade frictions, reduced labour mobility and low investment, and shattered EU agreements that have helped keep the small boats crisis at bay. Now, yes, people will say, Nigel Farage wasn't in power. He didn't orchestrate the Brexit deal. No, he didn't. You're absolutely right. But he campaigned he made promises on that Leave campaign on things that he did not keep as well. Remember that. So now our analysis suggests that his new plan will strike a further blow to Britain's teetering economy. So in its official blueprint, Operation Restore Justice, the party pledges to end illegal migration by ripping up Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention, pushing through a new mass deportation bill, and creating a new UK Deportation Command. Within 18 months, they say Britain would have 24,000 new detention places and be running up to 5 deportation flights every day. Offshore camps on Ascension Island are floated as a fallback. Now, if you think about some of the things, if you just stop for a second and just think about what's happening in America right now, you think about many, many families, wives, children being separated, being broken up, families who have worked and have contributed to American society, whether it's farmers or low-key workers, and they've been shattered, taken away, and sent out of the country or thrown in detention centres because of not having certain legal rights and whatnot. It's hurt many, many small businesses. It's hurt farming industries. It's hurting many of the US's different varieties of economy. If you do the same thing here in the UK, and we rely on immigrants to do some of the low-paying jobs, who's going to take up those jobs? If you take all the migrants, right? Let's say let's just go with the flow, right? Let's say everybody who is a Deliveroo driver, who does the Deliveroos, who deliver food to your door. Let's say all of those people get rounded up and they get put in the centres, right? Because you don't want anyone you don't want any migrants running any migrants in the UK, yeah? Who's taking up those jobs? Because he ain't going to be the typical white man, I'll tell you that. You know why? You know why a typical white man like myself ain't going to take up that job? I'll tell you why. Because the pay is shit. And I'm not going to take a crap job like that. I'd rather get paid from sitting here and doing what I'm doing than cycling around and getting one of the weakest pays. So then you have a problem. Then you won't have somebody to be able to deliver food to your door. And then it means you'll have to get off your couch to go and get the food yourself. Oh, it gets better. You find out that you can't get the usual food that you can get at the supermarket. Oh, that's why. Why not? Why not? Why not? Oh, because the farmers can't pick the food anymore. Because they don't have the workers anymore. Oh, that's right. Yeah, a lot of their small-time workers relied on migrants. You know, low-key workers. Oh, they've all been deported. They've all been wrapped up in detention centres. Oh, I guess we're not going to have a British farming industry now as well. Oh, okay. So we're not even going to have food on our shelves. I'm just citing two examples. You know, there's like hundreds and hundreds of examples of how the British system, the British economy, the British society would collapse under Nigel Farage if his plans were to come to fruition. And you're already hearing, you can hear what's been happening over in America. The amount of trouble, the amount of problems, the amount of bills, life is getting harder for Americans. Yeah, and I have American friends, not just those in politics, but outside of politics, who tell me that their bills have gone up, that things have costed skyrocketed for them because of actions being made by the Trump administration, and also it's affected the migrants who do some of the jobs that they've been doing. There's less of them doing those jobs, which means it strains certain states and certain places as a direct result of what he's doing. And Nigel Farage wants to copy that here. So, and it's also important to remember that your bills, that have been going up under Labour, and you're not happy about that, and rightfully so, well, they're going to go up a hell of a lot higher when this guy comes into power. Just remember that. You're going to be paying so much more out of your pocket when Nigel Farage comes to power. You think it's bad now, it's only going to get worse. The documents claim the plan would save taxpayers over $7 billion in 5 years and $42 billion in a decade. Money, they said, that currently squandered on asylum seekers and hotels. So the Office of Budget Responsibility, the body that audits the public finances, concludes the opposite. In its March 2024 outlook, the OBR shows that cutting net migration raises government borrowing by around 13 to 20 billion pounds within 5 years. Because migrants are mostly working of primary age, pay about $90,500 per adult per year in taxes and generate $4.1 billion a year in visa fees and surge charges. In short, lower migration worsens the public finance, not the reserve. Byline Times stress tested Reform UK's numbers against the OBR's modelling, and we found that instead of delivering £42 billion windfall over a decade, the plan generates the opposite. We found that over the next 5 years, if it was to happen, come to fruition, the economy would be about £49 billion smaller, while the Home Office would face a £7 billion in direct cost of detentions, flights and enforcement, according to analysis of OBR projections. Yeah, you would have to pump huge amounts of money into the Home Office for them to be able to do the kind of things that Reform UK want to do. Yeah, when that money should be, guess what, going into? Solving, I don't know, our cost of living crisis. How about our education system? How about our national healthcare service? I'd rather that money go towards those things, me personally. Smaller economy also implies a £17 billion shortfall in tax receipts, but this is a physical consequence of the GDP loss. Projected forward, by 2035, the drag rises to an economy of 63 to 81 billion pounds smaller, plus 4 to 10 billion pounds in direct exchequer cost, with 23 to 29 billion less tax revenue embedded in GDP loss. That's a lot of money to lose for a country that's supposed to be considered one of the richest in the world still. So Farage claims that the plan would save £234 billion over a lifetime of the average migrant. That's around 80 years. A figure taken from the Thatcherite think tank, the Centre of Politics Studies. However, the CPS later withdrew the figure as Erosers pressed about this. Farage doubled down, insisting the real savings would be even higher. So Farage first claimed that it was £234 billion from a think tank. The think tank has dismissed as retracted it. And Nigel Farage just said, no, it's actually higher than that. But wouldn't actually say what number then. We do not believe it's very meaningful to project as Reform has and over an 80-year period due to the impossibilities of incorporating the numerous factors that can change in such a time frame. Yeah, a lot can change in 80 years, guys. But if we were to do so over an 80-year period, the total loss to the British economy, Ralph, by Reform UK's plans would amount up to £2 trillion. The UK, £2 trillion, guys. That's the kind of numbers that you never hear in the UK. You only hear the word trillion in the US. This is what their modelling is projecting. A conclusion contested with OBR's modelling. According to Jonathan Ports, the Professor of Economic at King's College London and a former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office and Department of Work and Pensions, says, quote, recent migrants have high employment rates and their earnings, rise as they progress in the UK labour market. While the exact numbers are highly uncertain, Reform's proposals to kick out people who come here illegally to work and contribute would have a significant long-term economic and physical cost, and they are a toxic cocktail of xenophobia and economic illiteracy. Reform's planned and has the pace and the scale of military mobilisation. Within 18 months, they promise Britain would have created 24,000 new detention places, a deportation force ready to seize and escort people at any hour, and up to 5 planes a day ferrying migrants out of the country. This sounds very, very authoritarianism. Like, do you want to see literally? Do you want to see the likes of ICE on our streets? Yeah, like they in the US. Yeah, people masked up. Yeah, with no name badge, with rifles in their hands, in military suits. You know, coming out of nowhere, walking down the street and whatnot, grabbing anyone and anything that they can. I wouldn't want that. It sounds decisive, but there's one question that the party never answers: who pays? Oh, you know who's paying. You're paying for it. At present, Britain's immigration estate holds fewer than 2,000 people at any one time. Reform wants to expand that to 24,000. The Home Office's own figures show that each detention place costs £122 per person. Per day, fill 24,000 beds at 90% occupation rate, and you are looking at nearly £1 billion every year just to keep the system running. And that's before you pay a penny in capital cost. The government has already spent tens of millions converting RAF sites at Wethersfield and Scampton into makeshift accommodation camps. The Foreign Office has warned that offshore processing, like the mooted camps on Ascension Island, will cost around $220 million per 1,000 beds. At those rates, creating 24,000 places could swallow £5 billion or more in capital before a single person is deported. Reform promised 5 deportation flights every day. Picture that. A plane leaving Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted, Luton and Birmingham day after day, year after year. But removals are costly, and inspection in 2023 put the average cost at £15,000 per person. Rwanda flights cost £11,000 per head in aviation alone. Even on a conservative £5,000 per removal, the essential output of 10,000 removal a month, around 600,000 over 5 years, implies a 0.6 billion a year in aviation escort flights, higher if a throughput or per person costs rise. Mass removals need boots on the ground. To date, immigration enforcement budget is around £482 million a year. Reform system, we need 1,000 more staff, detention officers, escorts, caseworkers and lawyers. This is not just an expansion, it's a creation of a new deportation army costing at least £500 million annually in payroll and overheads. I believe that number would be far, far higher. The Home Office already pays £12 million a year in compensation for unlawful detentions. With indefinite detentions and tens of thousands more detainees, payouts could multiply. And then there are the offshore deals that send people to safe third countries. The Rwanda partnership was cancelled in July 2024 before any removal flights took place after the Supreme Court found that the plan unlawful. The National Audit Office has already lodged £370 million committed, plus high per person cost of £150,000 per person for processing and operational costs, plus a £20,000 transfer payment. Scaling up the model could dwarf even current costs. Even before you count this machinery, the OBR shows lower migration raises government borrowing. Add these bills on top and reform savings claims collapse even further. The National Audit Office found asylum accommodation contracts now total $15.3 billion over 10 years, with hotels costing around $1.3 annually. This is reform's jackpot. Shut the hotels, they say, save the money. But detention costs more. At £122 per day, 24,000 beds cost $1 million per year, the same as hotels, with added bills for guards, lawyers and flights. Reforms plans swap hotels for handcuffs, not savings. The ABR's March 2024 analysis show migrants are net contributors to the public finances. Cutting numbers pushes borrowing up. Even if hotels were closed tomorrow, detention costs do not vanish. Also, you forego the tax and free income the OBR counts on as well. Reform also proposes abolishing indefinite leave to remain, ILR, replacing it with short renewable visas. The OBR's physical modelling implicitly assures that many migrants stay, work and keep paying taxes over time, removing permanence that you shorten working life contributions, wage churn and trading costs for employers. And reduce long-run receipts. This makes the physical damage worse than the OBR's low migration scenario, even before the cost of detention and flights. Offshore proceeding is even worse. The Rwanda deal proves far from that from being cheap. The third country arrangements are almost the most expensive immigration policy ever tried. To get to $42 billion, reform essentially assumes that hotel closes overnight and detention is free. It is not. Offshore deals cost peanuts. They do not. Every deportation is instant. Even leaving the ECHR, it is not. Deterrence magically stopped the boats, despite National Audit Office confirming that there is no evidence harsh politics reduces arrival. It is not. You do not stop people crossing the boats. You're not going to stop the boats crossing, doing any of this. People want to come to the UK, they're going to come one way or another. None of this is realistic. Sorry, but the reality is going to hit you hard when you put all your money and all your eggs on reform saying that they are going to solve all this, and you find out it's going to cost you even more. The biggest shock comes not only from Home Office spreadsheets, but from ripping workers out of the economy. Oh yes, hope you're all ready to work more for less, because that's what's going to happen. The Migration Observatory warns that estimating the number of people in the UK without legal status is difficult due to uncertainties in the available data. The range appears to be between 600,000 and 900,000 people. If just 60% are working, reforms plans would remove 300,000 to 500,000 workers over 5 years. These are not abstract numbers. They are waiter servicing your lunch, the cleaner at your office, the building on your street, the carer looking after your mother. In hospitality, labour shortages push up wages and prices, with restaurant and hotels making up 11% of the inflation basket. That feeds directly into inflation. In construction in London, nearly half the builders are foreign-born. Fewer workers mean fewer homes, higher rents, and stall net zero projects. Yeah, obviously they want to, for all those who believe in green energy and what that kind of stuff is. Obviously, we know that Nigel Farage is against all that kind of stuff. He wants to drill fracking, open up more oil and gas revenues, and this will do nothing to improve energy bills, by the way. This is something he made claims time and time again. So yeah. And obviously as well there, the homes, like Labour have said they want to build 1.5 million homes. Now, we don't think they're going to build that many homes anyway. But if you don't have the workers to build the homes, how are you supposed to meet the targets for them? But we are in a housing crisis, yeah? Social care. Already 131,000 vacancies. When carers are short, NHS beds remains blocked, or at £395 a day each. The OBR expects net migration to average 350,000 a year over the forecast horizon, adding roughly 300,000 working age adults by 2029. That increase in labour supply is backed onto its growth and borrowing forecast. Removing those workers or denying them permanent by scrapping LINR, and the OBR's abstract numbers becomes painfully concrete. Fewer carers and builders, higher prices, slower house building, and higher borrowing. Economically, the impact is brutal, and around 45,000 output per worker, removing 300 to 500,000 workers, shrinks GDP by 10 to 23 billion annually. By year 5, the economy would be around £49 billion smaller, with an implied tax shortfall of about £17 billion. On top of that, the Home Office will face a £7 billion in direct costs for detentions, flights and enforcement. For the public finances, what matters is the net borrowing effect once lower revenues and lower spending are both taken into account. The OBR estimates that if net migration were cut by 200,000 a year, about 1 million fewer people over 5 years, government borrowing would be £13 to £20 billion higher by 2028-2029. The scenario is deliberately conservative. We assume 300 to 500k removals over the same horizon, implying a GDP drag of 0.7 to 1%, compared with OBR statically of 1.5% of GDP per 1 million migrants. The direction is the same. Lower migrants worsen growth and borrowing. Our analysis simply adds extra bills reform never mentions. The cost of detention estates, deportation flights, and enforcement staff. Yep, it all costs money, guys. And guess what? We taxpayers are going to be paying all of it. So stretch the horizon to 10 years and the contradiction becomes starker. Reform claims £42 billion saved over that period. In reality, extending our 5-year calculation forward shows Britons end up even poorer. We will end up poorer. By 2035, the economy would be £63 to £81 billion smaller, while the Home Office would face a £4 to £10 billion direct cost for detention, flights, enforcement. For public finance, what matters is the net borrowing effect once lower revenues and lower spending are both taken into account. On this measure, the OBR estimates that lower estimates leave the borrowing at £13 to £20 billion a year higher than by 2028-2029. The OBR has already demonstrated a link between lower migration and higher borrowing. Our projection simply shows that how the deterioration grows over a decade, once the cost of building and running mass deportation systems are factored in. The OBR's modelling suggests that cutting net migration by 1 million people would mean about 700,000 fewer workers, roughly 1.5% of the labour force, and about 1.5% of GDP. Our scenario is more conservative. We assume 300,000 to 500,000 removals with a slower productivity effect, which implies a GDP drag of about 0.7 to 1%. The reason our overall figures are larger is that we are measuring something different. The OBR reports that net borrowing and on the government finances, while our analysis shows wider GDP efforts over multiple years, plus the direct cost of mass deportation. Reform UK sells its plan as a one-off fix. Spend a little now, save £42 billion in the long run. But the economy damage doesn't work like that. When you strip 300,000 or 500,000 workers out of the economy, you don't just lose their wages and output for a single year. You permanently shrink the base of the economy that future growths build on. Investment decisions, tax revenue and productivity improvements all flow from that similar base. Exactly. How are you supposed to attract investors to an economy that is shrinking when you're not even prepared to allow workers, the right kind of workers for it as well? That's another thing that people need to take into account as well. Although GDP grows year after year, with fewer workers, it grows from a lower starting point. Each year, growth compounds that on a smaller base, so the gap between the economy we could have on that one that we are left with gets wider with every decade. The OBR does not forecast beyond 5 years, but its assumptions are structural. Migrants are mostly of working age. They participate more in the labour market and they are net tax contributors. Those truths don't expire in 2029, extend them across a working lifetime, and the effect is staggering. Even on static assumptions, the bill is 1 trillion in GDP loss. Under the more realistic compounding path, it rises to 2 trillion. With an embedded treasury tax loss of 350 to 700 billion. What the OBR flags as 13 to 20 billion pound annually borrowing in derivation to 5 years becomes an over decades a generational black hole. Think of it like a leak in a giant water tank. At the start, the leak cost you about £13 billion a year in lost output. That's the midpoint between our 5 to 10 years. If that leak never gets worse, then it's over 80 years you'll lose 80 buckets of £13 billion each. And that just adds up to over 1 trillion. This is the static scenario. But in reality, the leak doesn't stay consistent. It grows with the size of the tank. Britain's economy normally gets bigger every year. But you're permanently removing hundreds of thousands of workers when the economy grows from a smaller base each year. That means the gap versus the no deportation plan economy widens every year. So instead of losing the same £13 billion annually, the loss themselves gets larger. £13 billion in the first year, a bit more in the next, and so on. Even if the gap grows at only about 1.5% a year, the UK's long-term trend growth, then after 80 years, the common loss is closer to £2 trillion. This is compounding realistic scenario over an 80-year horizon, the span of a migrant's working lifetime. And here it is, a static on the floor, around 1 trillion in combined GDP losses over 80 years, 50 to 80 billion in direct physical costs. For detention and enforcement, the smaller economy implies 350 to 400 billion less tax revenue. This is already part of the GDP's effort. The OBR will treat the exchequer impact as a net borrowing shortfall. Compounding realistic around 2 trillion in combined GDP loss if the drag compounds, plus 50 to 80 billion pounds in direct physical loss with the GDP loss. Within that GDP loss, the Treasury receipts would be £700 billion lower over a lifetime. Again, this will be seen as a physical consequence of smaller economy. Now, this is, as we get more to the end of this, like this is numbers, these are facts. These are, this is what analysis here, not facts, but analysis here. And you could dismiss these analyses. But this, when people say they want radical change, this is the kind of radical change that you're going to get. And it's not for the benefit of you and for your children. The compounding view is more realistic because that's how economics actually behave. Lost workers mean less output today, but also less investment tomorrow, weaker productivity growth, and lower taxes revenue to fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Those missed opportunities don't just vanish. They ripple forward year after year. Of course, we can't precisely predict 80 years into the future because with this data, just because over that period of time, a variety of issues may change, migration policies may be adjusted, technology may transform the labour markets and so on. The global market, wars, conflicts, all that kind of stuff. But this exercise allows us to follow through the plausibility. With implementations of Reform UK's plan was stringent, following through without other complicating factors, and the upshot is clear. Policies that deliberately shrink the workforce in essential centres creates a permanent drag on the economy. A drag compounds that doesn't just hurt today's economy, it hands the next generation a smaller, weaker inheritance. Instead of £42 billion saved, Reform's plans risk an entire century of lost prosperity. A multi-trillion pound mistake that grows larger with every passing year. Guys, this was a long piece, but it needed to be said, and you needed to see from what Byline Times have broken down what that could potentially happen if Reform UK does go with these diabolical, insane plans in terms of mass deportation. Now, you might say that these are just predictions, these are forecasts, these are not guaranteed, and you're right, it's not absolutely sure that these things can happen. And you might turn around and say to me, this is scaremongering, that Nigel Farage is not going to do all these things. You don't know that. Nigel Farage has proven to be a liar time and time again. You don't know what this man is going to do when he comes into power. What I do know is that his priority is not the working class person. It's about enriching himself and his mates in doing so. Just like what Donald Trump is doing. But the only difference between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump is that Farage is not as old and as stupid as Donald Trump is. And you should be very, very concerned if he gets the keys to number 10. So what do you guys think about that analysis piece I broke down? It's quite a lot there to take in, especially given that this video went over 30 minutes. Let me know your thoughts and more on all of this down in the comment section below. If you found this video interesting, informative and helpful to you, please hit that like button and greatly appreciate. Share this across social media. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out Rumble and Patreon for exclusive content. And if you want to financially support me, consider becoming a YouTube member. If you made it to the end of the video, type Pingu in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.